Hello, everyone. If you don't know who I am, my name is Matt Bell. I'm the mapping phase coordinator for the Michigan Geological Survey. I'm glad you clicked on this video. So this video is going over the digital review process that the Michigan Geological Survey conducts within and presenting it to the Digital Mapping Techniques 2020 meeting to go over what our data is being used for and how it's being used for mapping. Specifically, this meeting is kind of a set of presentations that go over how each survey or each state survey is conducting their mapping techniques and what the national group considers to be their state standard. So on this particular day that we did our presentation for the Michigan Geological Survey, they were specifically talking about how each survey is conducting their own digital review of their products before it goes into publication. And so this goes into what the Michigan Geological Survey does to correct and validate the water well data within the Wellogic database. And so I'm going to let you guys enjoy the presentation, and I'll come back afterwards with some concluding thoughts.
My goodness. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity. And this actually was something that was reinforced by the team that is named on this sheet with me. Evangelia Murgia, Sophia Calhoun, and Matt Bell. And it really talks about getting down to the basics. So if I can, I'm going to go through this. I have a number of slides to go through, but I think that those of you that are in other parts of the country other than the Great Lakes states probably don't have an understanding of what some of the problems are that we have here. So first of all, what I'd like to do is that I'll have Matt, are you there? Do you want to just talk about this right now, or I'll just take it? One or the other.
Yeah, I can talk about it real quick. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so just a brief little background, and then I'll bring it back to John to go over more of the details, but just some background information on the project itself, which is known as the Triage Project. Michigan in 2021 has a lot of different issues concerning the water resources that we have, the different wells that we have, the high capacity wells, different groundwater contaminations, and particularly now dealing with PFAS contamination, which John will talk about later. And so the biggest thing now is being able to use geologic mapping to better understand the groundwater, where it's flowing, and be able to talk about these different issues concerning our resources, our contamination issues, et cetera, et cetera. And so far, the only open source database that we have for that subsurface information for the groundwater is the Wellogic database. And so the biggest issue that we are having right now is having the water wells in the database being corrected, because many of the wells were found to be generalized and had several incorrect locations. Some of the wells can be up to and exceeding a mile away from where they should be located. So since 2003, Michigan has not corrected or trained drillers in proper input of data to Wellogic. And so I'll bring it back to John to kind of talk about the more specifics about it.
Okay, just very quickly then, is that just an update on it. So we asked the question, what's the value of Michigan water? And I've been around as the director of the state survey for 8 years, and these are the questions that I keep asking. Well, one of the issues is that Michigan hasn't funded mapping in the state on a consistent basis at all. And so less than 10% of the state has been mapped. There's no documentation of the water resources, and we have greater than 25% of the source is not there. Aggregates is another undocumented societal and economic infrastructure. And as you all know, is if you have aggregates or you have sand and gravels, that is a potential water resource, and those haven't been put together. So water and aggregates are geologically connected. I don't have to tell you about that. We have surface and subsurface access to both the water and the aggregates. They neglected to understand the science of aggregates, and it's all been generalized. And who would use the data? Well, what we found out since I've been here is that we had regulators, engineers, geologists, city planners. Everybody was going to Wellogic. And if you touched it, if you touch Wellogic, You found out, if you look closely, that the wells were not corrected. You corrected it. So everybody that touched it had to correct it. So we just didn't know anything. So we don't have a validated database. And it's what I've been arguing about since I arrived in 13, is that why did we do this starting in 03? We didn't do anything. So here's just a summary of the wells that we have in Michigan. And for many of you, if you did not aware, is that we have cumulatively about 1.4 million wells in Michigan. We may be the highest, if not one of the highest states that have wells, water wells. The current Wellogic database has around 700,000 in it. And one of the other key things to understand is that when the drillers put this in, some of them don't even tell what the aquifer type is. So we have about 220,000 that don't even tell you what the aquifer type is that they've actually put it in. But the other key is that we have a definition of drift wells versus bedrock wells. And so as you can see, you have a concentration in the areas of the drift wells, and then you have the bedrock wells, and you can see where there are both drift and bedrock wells. But the real note is that many times the aquifer type can often be wrong. And so this database was started in 03. They never put together a program to validate the locations or to train anybody in putting the data together. And so it's one of the things that part of the survey that I've been trying to do now for the last 8 years. So we have quality geologic information is useful. It's essential for any data set. However, Wellogic is the only database, and there are a number of problems. First, lack of glacial terms. They took all the data. There were essentially about 5,000 terms the driller had. They honed it down, and these were non-geologists, honed it down to 188 terms. Wow, that's great. The quality of lithologic descriptions are from outstanding to totally useless that we have. Therefore, it's unreliable, makes them difficult and impossible to correlate the subsurface units, and all must be reviewed carefully. Cuttings, descriptions of depth are not always correct. So, no, drillers are not inputting quality data. So, the Michigan Groundwater Association, since I've been here, we're now training drillers, and we're going to do this on a statewide program going forward from now, so that they are at least putting in standard terms and other things. But Michigan, as far as users, they've all used the well logs as a primary source of initial data. This is preliminary understanding of aquifers and other subsurface units for the last 18 years, since 2003. But they've been using Wellogic to produce 3D interpretations. Oh, wait a minute, this is just information from drillers, yet that was the resource that they've been using in some of the programs that we have. So the errors that we've found in doing this since pre-220 data, anywhere from 35 to 80% of the logs are not accurately located in Wellogic. And that's a huge range, and it's a huge amount of error that we have in the data. So if we look at what the data is being used for, the Michigan Water Withdrawal Assessment Tool is a tool that we've had in Michigan now since 2006. And about 60% of the Lower Peninsula, in case you didn't know we had two peninsulas, the Lower Peninsula groundwater comes from glacial material. The MiWWAT is looking at just those users of greater than 70 gallons per minute. That's called high capacity. And so what we have down here are the applications that we have for that. And this tool, of course, is using the driller's logs, and it's not factual. Well, on this particular map I show here is that these are the quads that have been mapped by the Michigan Geological Survey since federal funding became available in the 1990s. And so we only have about 83 quads that are done. And so we still have a large volume, and that's less than 10%. Also in these areas circled, this is an area of arsenic that's naturally occurring in the groundwater. And in this area right here, we also have arsenic, but we also have chlorides that are also occurring in this area. So when we look at the high capacity, and this is one of the things the state's looking at, is that what we have are stressed aquifers. This is where they have a calculation of how much water is in the aquifer. And of course, it's water well logs. And the drillers only drill down to where they receive enough water so that they can use it in the for the applicant. And so in many cases, what we found down in the southwest part of the state, down in this area down here, is that the wells are 180 to 280 feet. Since we've been mapping and we drill from surface down to bedrock when we're doing our mapping as far as a survey, we have up to 200, 250 feet additional, if you will, resource that is not included in this model. And this model is said to be peer reviewed. No, it's not. It's just something that everybody's accepted. And so then they have to go through what's called a site-specific review, which means they have to have a geologists go out there, and they spend anywhere from $20,000 to $60,000 to prove that their well is not going to impact the streams in that particular area. So in the dark red dots, this is just showing where we've got the high capacity applications that have been involved. And I'm just giving you the map again to show you the area where we've done the actual mapping, where we have surface to bedrock type geologic information. One thing to point out is agriculture represents about 25% of Michigan's economy. Many or most of these wells that we have in these are high capacity are related to agricultural use in Michigan. So looking at existing contaminants, just a summary of where it's been found in groundwater resources. This just shows the nitrates, and much of the nitrates is two places it comes from. One is from septic systems and the other is from the application of fertilizers. And then the arsenic levels, what I talked about before, and much of this is down in this southeast part of the state, and this arsenic is naturally occurring in the glacial material, and we also have it occurring in other places, and this just shows the range of values that we have. The other thing that Matt just talked about is we have a term called PFAS, and this has emerged literally in the last 4 years. And Michigan, to their benefit, they went out and they sampled 1,400 public water supplies, and they've identified those that had any potential impact and having reached, if you will, the quality. And down here on the left, it shows what it is that 8 parts per trillion for PFOA and 16 of PFAS. So they've looked at their water supply wells, and then anybody else that has brought in samples or anything else, they look at it. But they have multiple locations. And at this time, they have about 152 locations that have exceeded these requirements down here. And the open file data is what? It's Wellogic. And in talking with the state water division has asked us to go ahead and map different counties. They're just dotted right here in red, where they see that they have water demands for high capacity. The MPART Eagle PFAS group has 47 counties that they've identified for us if they want to see the data. And of course, that's looking at the data from a 1 to 2 mile radius, and we're going to be talking about that here in pretty quick here. So, Matt, is this yours or is this mine?
This is still yours.
Good. All right. So, in 2018, MGS proposed to Eagle, MPART, that we really need to have a better understanding. And so they were giving us locations. I showed you that we had 152 locations. They identified locations that had PFAS in the wells. And so we went out and gathered, we didn't go out, we went and gathered the data out of Wellogic, and then we looked at the other data sources that we had out there. And so in that 2 to 5 mile radius, that's when we found out that the locations could be 1 to 6, the wrong township. Some of them were in Lake Michigan or Lake Huron, and yet nobody bothered to correct those. We then had to look at the depth of groundwater. We were looking at flow direction. We were looking at basic geology, surface water flow, and depth to bedrock. And so we looked at all the sources of data that we could get. And again, over 30 to 80% of the wells were not within that radius. We couldn't predict the direction of groundwater flow or surface water flow in some of these because of the location of the wells that we put on the map. And so every well needed to be validated or corrected. And so in showing that to them, this is how they actually came back to us, and we were awarded the original grant to go ahead and start correcting the wells in Wellogic. And so we also have 700,000 scanned logs. These are 1960 to 2003. These are the paper logs. There's 5 different generations of paper logs that were generated. We have to look at those and inputting those into the system, and we're doing that on a countywide basis. And so other states, for example, they actually have geologists sitting down with well data and developing their own well databases, whether it's lithology, when verifying location and other things, but they establish their own database. The following is a summary of how the MGS team is correcting and locating them, but what we found out is that if you don't have the data corrected first, as far as location, nothing else works. And the second part is, there's actually 2 more parts. One is that we're training the drillers so that they input the data. The other thing that I'll be proposing to AIPG, the professional geologists, and those of you that do not know, Michigan does not have a state registration, but the AIPG organization is the 2nd or 3rd largest in the country. And we are going to be talking about developing a standard database for inputting geologic data from all borings that are done so that it's all open filed so that we can have it, because we cannot rely on the drillers. And we have well over 30,000 sites in the state that have geologic information, and it's all in paper files. And that's one of the things we want to try and do, is to get that historic data into a database and then start looking at developing a database for the state with any new data for drilling. So I'll turn this over to Matt Bell. He's part of the team that's been working on compiling this and what we're trying to do to come up with more efficiency in doing this. Go ahead, Matt.
I'm actually going to turn this over to Sophie to kind of talk about the team as a whole and kind of go over the main groups that are associated with it, and then I'll come in at the last group. So, Sophie, if you want to take it away.
Awesome.
All right,
Yep.
this is Sophia Calhoun. She's a student here at Western Michigan, and this group started in 2018 with 2 or 3 people, and you can see now we're up to 32 students, staff working on this. Go ahead, Sophie.
Yes. Thanks, John and Matt. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about our triage team as a whole for the Wellogic database. We're consisted of 3 main groups, which has grown from 3 students to now 32 students and contract staff. Our first group is the digital input group, and we're looking at the scanned pre-2000 logs that John was talking about. And then we have the location validation team, which looks at all of the wells that already exist within the Wellogic database and correcting those locations. And then the mapping team, which Matt is going to talk about in just a little bit. So how is our team providing quality data? Our team members are currently trained and work remotely. It's mostly independent work once the training's done, but because we work remotely, we try to provide as many types of communication as possible while also performing frequent quality checks and assurance to ensure that our data is staying at a high standard. We always try to keep in mind that our main goal of digital input and location validation is to provide quality data not only for our own mapping efforts, but all Wellogic users. Because as John stated, there's a lot of people. If you go to the next slide. All right, so the first team, our digital input team. The main goal of digital input is to ensure all of those legacy scanned water logs, which are the pre-2000 ones, are preserved within the Wellogic database, and we look at those on a per county basis. If one of these logs already exists in Wellogic, we ensure that a set of essential fields are corrected, and we found that at least 75%, and that number is actually growing, is incorrect, and we need to correct these essential fields. The essential fields were chosen based off of, what is important to our mapping efforts, and a little bit more. If a legacy log does not exist in Wellogic, we input all of that data to make sure that it is available to everybody. Our location accuracy, we determine that based off of it being within 200 feet of the location. And then we also have a small set of paper logs, which are post 2017, and these are given to these are given to us by drillers who are not able to enter them on their own. And to date, we have entered and or validated 72,000 scanned or paper logs, which is a crazy number. Here is an example of just what this actually isn't that bad of an example of what these paper logs look like. So we kind of turned this big mess into something that is much more readable and usable, as well as adding the lat long. So our next team is the location validation team. The location validations team goal is to validate the location of the water wells that already exist in the Wellogic database, which is that 700,000 of them. And we do this on a per county basis as well. The location validation team is only looking at the location, and they use the same as the digital input of the 200 foot accuracy radius. And we found this to have about a 35% error rate. And to date, we have looked and validated at 164,000 of these wells. And then the next slide is just an example of how off some of these locations are. It can be even worse than this, but it can go from being in the middle of a cornfield to the actual house or property that it is on. And I will hand it over to Matt to talk about our mapping team.
Yeah.
Matt, this is Dave.
Yes.
You've got about a minute and a half left.
Okay.
Roughly.
Okay, cool. Then I'll try and rush through this. So after everything has kind of been compiled with both the location validation team and the digital input team, then we use the ArcGIS tools and different GIS methods to use this and present verified data from the Wellogic system at the selective locations, as John alluded to before, where we have the 2 to 5 mile radius locations that require additional groundwater analysis. And so this is kind of, it's typically a map or a site-specific mapping effort, and basically what it all includes is the actual cross-sections with the verified well logs, along with the groundwater and bedrock surfaces, and then associated bedrock profiles along with the cross-sections, and then looking at surface water and groundwater flow directional maps. And so if you want to go to the next slide. And so during this, to actually make things accessible and easy for our workers to use, I've established 7 different videos that go over the different steps to actually conducting and establishing a standard for making these maps and cross sections. And so I separate out into 7 videos here to make it easier for people to understand, and not only explaining what to do, but why we're doing it. And I think that's more important than anything else. And so if you want to hit the next thing. So this is something that we want to do at a quarterly basis. And so this is an example of a groundwater flow map for a place over in what's called the Grand Ledge, which is kind of near the Lansing area. And so this is looking at the surface water and how all the water wells are distributed within this location area, and then the associated cross-section lines along with it. If you want to go to the next slide for me. These are just a couple of things to highlight. And then this is what the actual cross-sections look like. We create well sticks that show the different lithologies, the different bedrock surfaces, and all that sort of stuff. So next slide, please. And this is going to be our last slide. So what's next for us? What we want to do is we want to create more automation and making the standard much more user-friendly and being able to make it the same way every time. So implementing Python codes, creating specialized toolbars, and then furthermore going into utilizing the GEM schema to provide that information that the standard federal format to our users. And so taking the well logs and creating surfaces, and then looking at a larger scale mapping effort, looking at a countywide superficial map for each county. As John kind of alluded to, we need more information and putting that into a GEM schema. And so that's all that I have. And then this is, if you want to contact us for more information, these are our contacts. But yeah, I guess we'll take questions at another point. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Michigan Survey.
Thank you.
It's a huge job. It's good to tackle these things head on.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. Just some final concluding thoughts just to kind of wrap things up. It really was an honor to present at the DMT meeting this year. There's just a lot of good information that was out there, and being able to express what we're doing at the Michigan Geological Survey was really it was really good to hear people agreeing with us and hearing some constructive criticism from others. It was just really a really cool experience, and so I was really glad and very honored that we were able to present at the meeting this year. And just a whole as to the week-long meeting, there was a lot of good information out there. And a lot of stuff that I think that the Michigan Geological Survey can adapt and be able to include more information for people out there to just really understand what we're trying to portray with our maps, portray with our cross-sections, and really understand what our data is being used for, and how to better just include more data information and be more accurate to what the needs are for the community. So if there's anything that you would like to know about the Michigan Geological Survey, or if there's anything you have questions about, please put it down in the comments, and we'll hopefully be able to get to it as soon as we can. Yeah, thanks for tuning in, and yeah, hope you have a great day, everybody.